Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Illustration Department podcast. My name is Giuseppe Castellano. In this podcast, I talk to folks in illustration, graphic design, publishing, animation, and other creative fields about their work, the lessons they've learned, and the bumps and bruises they've experienced along the way. In this episode, my guest is award-winning illustrator and distinguished educator, Robert Hunt. If you, like Robert, were described in a speech as a, quote, illustrator's illustrator, how would you react? With humility? With pride? Robert shares how he reacted. On one of the topics, Robert explains why illustrators should embrace woodshedding. We discuss how he created the DreamWorks logo, and Robert tells us what the great Kazuhiko Sano meant to him and to the illustration world at large. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Man, did I have quite a day. I was literally sitting here where I'm currently sitting, ready to record, minutes before you jump on, and my daughter texts me to say that she has a pretty violent stomach ache. Ooh. And I need to go get her right away because she won't be able to be on the bus. Like, she needed to come home right away. So I do that, come home, pull up in the driveway, settle back into my work day. Then I noticed the car was tilted a little bit. So I looked to the back wheel only to see that it is flat as hell.
Flat tire.
I had to take it to I had to cancel another meeting. I had to take it to the mechanic. It's been a weird afternoon, but I'm glad that we were able to get this in.
Yeah.
Part of your creative practice involves what you call woodshedding, and it goes back in a way to your grandfather.
That's true.
What's woodshedding?
Well, the term doesn't go to my grandfather, but I grew up in the same town as my grandparents lived, so I was able to. I wound up spending a lot of time there, and my grandfather had a stroke. He had two strokes, really three. There was sort of a final one, but what happened was I was at that point kind of the man of the house in my home. My dad was out of the picture, and I had to go over there to kind of help around the house because my grandfather, even though he was still alive, wasn't able to do much because of this stroke. But he had a wood shop because he had been an engineer, not an engineer in the sense that. He was kind of a steam fitting engineer. So he was a designer of hydraulic systems in buildings and things like that, and builder of what we now would call HVAC, I guess, and plumbing. Right. But he was retired, and he had a whole big shop in his basement. He couldn't really use a lot of it. I mean, he could use it, but he only really had one hand. So he showed me how to do stuff down there. There were some things that were just like verboten. Even eventually I got to use them, but like he had a bandsaw, he had a lathe, he had a metal lathe, and all these kind of tools that I would go over there, and then we would kind of hide from my grandmother down in the basement together, and we would just make stuff. He would show me how to make a box. How to fix a window frame, take the glass out of a window and put new glass in it and put it back together. And he was always emphasizing how important it was to be able to do these things by yourself. And because he only had one arm, one functional hand, he couldn't, he's always having to kind of work around that, which I kind of remembered that came in handy when I kind of lost the use of my thumb. Things like tying shoes and buttons and things that you sort of take for granted being able to do. But anyway, so I don't know, I could go on and on about my grandfather, but
so what exactly is the woodshedding? Where's the woodshedding? How does the woodshedding apply to your creative practice, though?
Well, woodshedding is like a term from musicians. Jazz musicians and classical musicians use that term. It's just like you need to put in the time to get good enough to you might be able to sit in with, like, if you're an intermediate guitarist, let's say, you could sit in with other intermediate guitarists, but you'd never be able to hold your own against, studio musicians.
Gotcha.
To be able to hold a conversation with those kind of people or work, on an equal level with them, you have to pull yourself up to that level, and that just is practice.
Right.
They don't talk about that in, lots of areas, but I mean, ballet dancers take classes every day. Mm-hmm. I remember reading about Yo-Yo Ma playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star every day. He still does, apparently.
Really?
Plays very fundamental things to just keep going. Yeah. And So that's kind of what woodshedding is in the music world, apparently. And I just I just like the term, so I use it when I'm trying to encourage people to, or explain my process, which is, one of just practicing.
I was driving in the car on the way back from the mechanic. Someone said, I was just listening to the radio, listening to, Philadelphia sports radio. Someone just mentioned the word shortcut, and it sparked a line of questioning in my head that I was like, oh, I'm going to talk to Robert. I definitely need to bring this up. There is a sense, well, how do I say this kindly? I feel like more and more, especially these days, creative folks, specifically illustrators, are looking for quicker ways to do what it is that they need to do.
Right.
I'm asking myself this question now, and I don't really have an answer for it just yet, or at least it isn't fully baked. And the question would be, is quick all that great? Is it really that important to quicken your pace or to find the ways to shorten the distance between where you start and where you end up? My answer right now is no. I think when we look for quicker ways to do things, we overlook the important bits and pieces of our creative practice and of our lives really that really matter.
Yeah. Your
process isn't that quick, so I thought you might be the best person to talk to about this.
Good question. No. And well, I would say no. I don't think quick is necessarily. I think illustration, being successful at illustration means you have to be good, right? We would say that as a general term, like you have to be good at it. Yep. But now what good means is completely situational in illustration, because it kind of depends on what the problem is that you're solving and who you're solving it for and what the objective of the project is. So speed maybe matters a lot if you're like a concept artist and you're working at Lucasfilm and somebody's coming in a half an hour to look at a bunch of stuff on the wall. But right,
that's not what I'm talking about.
I know it's not, but I'm saying that's where quickness matters. Where you just have to slam out something. It's good to be able to do that, I would say, in any situation, but that doesn't mean that makes it better. And I think for us, it's not supposed to be easy. I just don't think easy is relevant, because what's relevant are results.
Right.
If you look at Sargent's paintings, for example, like his landscapes or his personal paintings, they look like they're just tossed off, but they're not, right? But they look incredible. There's a painting. I was just in New York, and I went through. I did a couple of quick trips through the Met, and I was looking at this painting. I think it's called The Hermit. It just looks like almost a messed up palette, at first, and then you look at it and you see all these like deer and the guy hanging there in the trees, and it looks so free and spontaneous. But you can't do that easily. That's where the woodshedding comes from. The woodshedding. Sargent had painted so much and put so much learning into his work that he could just sort of make little dashes in the right place that made a deer or made that just harmonized these paintings into these statements. And I think that's something you can't do without practice.
Right.
I see the same thing with my students. They're taking every kind of shortcut. Yeah. They have an iPad, and they've got the iPad set to constrain their lines so they can make kind of arcs perfectly, and all these kind of things that take away from their personal fingerprint. Yep. But it makes it faster. And I'm just kind of thinking, if you wanted something fast to make money, probably this is, why do you want to do it so fast? And it's always just because they want to be doing something else.
That's my question. What are you saving this time? You're saving time.
Exactly.
For what?
Speed isn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It should just be a thing based on what gives you the results you want. And, with an illustrator, sometimes speed is necessary. But again, that takes a lot of practice to be able to do something quickly. So just shortcuts don't really help you.
Right. And let's both be very clear here. We're not talking about you're raising 3 children, you have a full-time job, right, and you're looking for ways to speed up your creative practice because you work at night and you don't have all the time in the world.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly.
We're talking about shortcuts. We're talking about skipping the learning process.
Well, and just the whole idea of speed. I mean, there's sculptors online who these big marble figurative sculptors.
Yeah.
He's doing it with using 3D printing and using programmed jackhammer to kind of rough out the marble, right. and then all kinds of hydraulic tools and laser cutting and there's very little of his own hand in this thing at the end, but it looks great. It looks like a sculpture because he's found a model who looks like a model in a sculpture, and he's scanned the person and carved this thing digitally. I kind of feel like it's just you're cosplaying the idea of being Michelangelo.
Well said.
It just doesn't make any kind of sense to me to look at that as an achievement.
Right.
You're just doing it for money. That's fine. But then, does that mean you're an artist? I'm not sure it does. Just because somebody might buy something you make doesn't really make you necessarily an art. I don't think success isn't really a metric that we should be using either. I don't think. Although you have to on some level.
Right. So, you went to undergrad at UC Davis. You earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in 1980 from the Academy of Art in San Francisco.
Right.
That's where you met Kazuhiko Sano.
Yes.
Is it Kazuhiko? Is that how you pronounce his first name?
Kazuhiko. Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about Kazuhiko Sano, man, because I did an art history post that I published on Substack a few weeks ago on him, and the more I read about Kazuhiko Sano, the more I just absolutely fell in love with his approach, his life story, his art. As a Star Wars kid, his poster for Return of the Jedi 1983 was the first real illustration that I remember feeling in love with. That poster, that album. I mean, of course, I had the record album. I watched the movie a bunch, whatever. But I didn't know who Kazuhiko Sano was at the time. But when I found out about him, by the way, quite recently, thanks to London Lad, in an episode a few episodes ago, he mentioned Kazuhiko Sano as a reference, and I was like, in my head, I was like, oh, okay, look that up.
Yeah.
How did I not know about Kazuhiko Sano? Anyway, man, you and I could talk forever about him, but just you met him. What was that like?
Well, when I came to the academy, I came down. I lived in Davis after I graduated for a couple of years. I've been saving up to go to art school. It was the only art school I could find that had a graduate program, or they had an ad that said that they had a graduate program somewhere. Because I was looking wouldn't even buy magazines, but I was buying a magazine looking at a magazine about design magazines, probably CA or something. And so anyway, I came down to the academy, and I had made a kind of a portfolio of what I thought, would be the thing to show somebody. I had an appointment with this person who was Barbara Bradley, and she said, well, I think we could, find a way to help you become an illustrator. We're just starting this graduate program. You'd have to be remediated. You'd have to do some remediation, but we could do that. And they connected me up with Bruce Wolfe, who was not a teacher there, but he was an illustrator in the Bay Area. Yeah. I went over to meet him, and I started working with Bruce a little bit. And they had a job board, and I was getting these little jobs. So I was already kind of seeing was an illustrator, but I was in this graduate program. I was the only one that seemed to be there. I never saw the other. What I learned was only one other person until there was a San Francisco Society of Illustrators show. Everybody was standing around this one painting, and all these, like David Grove and Bruce was there, and the few people I know who were real illustrators, but they were all looking at this one painting that was by Kazu, and I looked at it and said Kazuhiko Sano. By now I knew that Kazu was the other student, but I had never met him, and I didn't even meet him there. He wasn't there. They were just knocked out by this painting, and they were talking about Kazu with the kind of a mix of awe and real frustration. And I realized later on that this was the kind of frustration I read about when Jimi Hendrix came to London. He would go and sit in a club, and all these people like Jeff Beck were in the audience, and they just wanted to quit. Just said, I thought I was doing pretty good, and then I saw Hendrix, and I just thought, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Eric Clapton, That's what they were talking about Kazu, and Kazu couldn't speak English very well. That's part of why he didn't go to things. at that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He'd gone through this whole program. He went through the whole undergraduate program at the academy.
Yep.
They had sort of started this MFA program. It seemed like partly, to have a program to keep Kazu there. I kind of felt like I was going to be the straight man to Kazu, in a comedy club. But it was, what happened was that we were the two people that were in that milieu there, so we wound up sort of competing against each other. And I had to really, it just forced me to work that much harder. And just before he died, he told me, not just before, but about 2 weeks before, he came and talked to a class of mine, because I had quit teaching at the academy long ago and gone to CCA. Kazu was still teaching at the academy. So it was hard to get him to come to talk to a class because he never had time. But he did come and talk to my class because he'd promised. And this was just, shortly before he passed away. It was funny in a weird sort of way, because I gathered my students together, and there was another teacher there, Bob Ciano, who you might know as an art director for many publications in New York back in the day, but he now teaches at CCA, and he was in this room along with me with his class. Mm-hmm. And Kazu, everyone calls me Robert, but people who knew me from before I was an illustrator call me Bob, including my wife. And there's only, just a handful of people who know me from that time. But Kazu always called me Bob because he heard me referred to as Bob. And probably easier for him to say, too. So Anyway, he said something that sounded like something I would have said about him, which was that I had forced him to be a better illustrator. The funny thing was, all the students in the room thought he was talking about Bob Ciano. He said, because Bob made me a better illustrator, and I want to thank him. And there, I was like crying.
Were you standing? Yeah, no, were you standing there going like, he's talking about me, guys. He's talking about me.
I was, kind of.
Oh gosh, I would have loved to talk to him on this.
Well,
podcast.
So anyway, that's how I met him, and we graduated at the same time. We had a show together. They let us have our own show, and so we had a two-man show, and then we liked that idea, and so what we did was we started planning that we would have a show every 2 or 3 years together. Yeah. All the time we would go to New York and show our work and try and help each other, meet people, and I was always intensely jealous of Kazu's abilities and always kind of felt like I was way behind him, but in the end, people have always told me that they always saw us as two very different artists. Yeah. I'd like to think that that's the case. But Kazu was an incredible person. He was just like a magic person. As soon as you met him, you knew you were in the presence of, before you even knew what kind of artist he was. He was just a very kind and thoughtful person.
Yeah. I read that you two, with portfolios in hand, would make annual trips to New York City and meet with art directors and such and pick up client work. Yes. The way I'm imagining it is that the two of you, got into a plane, landed in New York, had a hotel, knocked on doors. I mean, how was it? A couple of days, a week?
It was usually a week.
Would you meet art directors together, or would you leave in the morning and say, hey, you go meet those art directors, I'll meet these, I'll meet you for lunch?
So we had in our relationship, one thing we did was we made rules about it. If that sounds crazy, but we made kind of regulations, and generally speaking, we stuck to that. Our basic rule was that we would, if we went to see somebody that one of us knew, that we would both go and try to get the other person in there. So if during the year, let's say I had gotten a new client in New York, that if I was going to go see them, I'd bring Kazu. Then there would be, sometimes people that we just knew independently. And, we kind of agree that person was just, we're just going to, you go see that person on your own. Yep. I was always worried that at the beginning that, people would only call Kazu, but it didn't work like that. It just worked out. We would go in together, and sometimes one of us would get a job, and sometimes we'd both come out with like stacks of manuscripts.
That was a happy flight home, I would imagine.
It usually was. I mean, our goal was always to at least get enough projects to justify the cost of taking the trip, which would usually be easy to do.
This lasted some 17 or so years, close to 20 years. The two of you would do this.
Right.
Until you said illustration evolved. That word is your word.
Okay.
Evolved. What does that mean?
Well, I think what happened was we both started to want to do other things besides book covers.
Okay.
There were a lot of Japanese publishers that wanted to bring artists to Japan. And Kazu was involved with one of these publishing companies, and he spent a lot of time trying to, kind of make a foothold in the Japanese fine art market. And they approached me too, and with mixed results, and so there was a little bit of friction over that with us, I would say, but it wasn't really so much that. It was more that he had a big exhibition in Japan, and then another exhibition through these publishers, and it was just, these things would take years to prepare for. We just kind of postponed the idea of having to go to New York, and then I started. I had a thing that happened to me, which was that I had this hand injury, and I changed up my whole approach to painting and everything. When I came out of that, I started to feel like it opened the possibility of me doing a lot of different kind of illustration. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, I found myself in a kind of a whole new career where I was doing a lot more editorial and more just a broader sort of spectrum and higher end kind of illustration than beyond book covers and advertising that I'd been doing. So we just both kind of burrowed into our own direction a little bit for 5 or 6 years, I would say. But this was just a matter of our kids were becoming teenagers, kids are growing up, and just life is making it difficult.
It was a younger man's game.
That's what changed, I guess. It's not so much that the industry changed. I guess our idea of what we wanted to do within it changed.
With Kazu, with you, there are so many educators of illustration that I've looked at, I've studied, I've learned about, that I admire, because I want to be one of them. I want to get to a place where I can speak about illustration and I can help illustrators like my heroes did, like an Andrew Loomis or Bridgman or Robert Henri, or Howard Pyle, for God's sake.
Sure.
And I think Kazu certainly is in that camp. It seems as if he is, because I was doing research.
I think so. And you've built a platform where you're reaching people, right? So I think you're doing that. You're certainly in a position to do it.
Trying, Robert. This podcast is produced by the Illustration Department, a global leader in online education for illustrators. Visit illustrationdept.com for offerings like mentorships and portfolio reviews, testimonials, our alumni showcase, our best-selling Substack, and more. That's illustrationdept.com. And now, back to our conversation. Speaking of Return of the Jedi, Dennis Murin, who was the visual effects supervisor, the lead visual effects supervisor there, reached out and asked you to do something for Steven Spielberg. And I guess I never knew where the DreamWorks logo came from until very recently doing research for you, because you are quite a large part of that logo. Correct?
When you look at the logo on screen, the only part of it that isn't my painting is the lettering, the word DreamWorks, and the little pond ripples in the fishing bobber. When the bobber hits the water and the pond ripples come out. Yeah. That part was done at ILM. The rest of it is paintings that I did. This project had been underway for a while, all very top secret, under wraps and whatnot, because DreamWorks Studio wasn't really even known about yet.
Was this 94? Was this when?
Probably 95, maybe. 94, probably. Yeah, 94 while it was going on. But so various design agencies and studios and companies, of which I only know about one, which is called Kaleidoscope. But other places were probably working on it too. We're trying to make this thing for Spielberg. I don't know whether whether Geffen and Katzenberg were involved at that point, but at some point the project moved to ILM, and ILM took it over because of all the new CGI stuff that they had going. There was a thought that they thought, well, we can make our own version of this thing, it'll be great. So a lot of people had worked on it, and Steven was not happy with it, apparently. So I was told. Spielberg just didn't feel like this had the right feeling, and at that point, I think Dennis suggested to Steven that, it should be more like a hand-painted, like an old-fashioned kind of classical movie logo. It needed to have some, have kind of like traditional craftsmanship. Now, I had done little things for Jurassic Park that, kind of speculative designs for stuff that I did for Dennis for Jurassic, and I think, and I know Steven saw those things. I don't know whether he, Steven, like I'm talking to him all the time, but Mr. Spielberg didn't, had looked favorably upon these things. I don't know whether this was part of, how this happened, but what I do know is that Dennis recommended me to the producer who was in charge of this project. And so they called me, Clint Goldman. He phoned me up and said, we're working on this thing. It's very secret. We're going to send you an NDA and some notes, and we need a picture of some clouds, and we need it like tomorrow. We just need, maximum drama of clouds. And
talk about speed.
I said, it's like the beginning of the credit reel of, a motion logo for this studio. It's all very hush hush, but it's going to end with clouds. And we've been making clouds here, but it's been suggested that we do some hand painted clouds. So we're gonna commission you to do just the end frame, was what the term that they used. We want to see the end frame of this logo. DreamWorks will come across the middle of the screen, and there'll be just clouds. And then they sent me over a package, a little envelope, and a messenger came over on a motorcycle from ILM, and they had a package. They made me sign an NDA before I even looked at the package, and then the package was 3 or 4 sheets of, like you would print out on your Epson printer, of these clouds, and they looked kind of like what you would see if you looked out of the window of an airplane, because you're kind of passing through clouds. So like the bottom half of the screen were like these white fluffy clouds, and the top was like blue sky. And it looked like kind of real clouds, but they were generated by CGI, and they didn't have any kind of. I could see why they weren't working, which was because they just didn't have any sort of drama to them. They said, we just do something dramatic. We need it tomorrow morning, and it has to be small enough that you can carry it on a plane. So I said, what do you mean by tomorrow morning? They said, no, like 7. Because we have to go over to Oakland Airport and get on PSA or whatever it was at the time and get down there with this. So I just kind of free-handed up something that looks very much like what the final end of the movie looks like. It didn't take that long, It just kind of made this sort of off-axis cloudscape. But the big change that I made at first was that I made it at night. They had in some of their earlier versions, they had the moon. The letter D in the logotype was the shape of the moon, and on a couple of them they had a little guy sitting on the moon, and so there was a little guy, but the little guy was, what they told me was, we don't want this. Not this, absolutely we don't want. Don't do anything with the lettering, and absolutely don't do the guy. The logo with the moon has been completely abandoned, and we're not doing that. Mm-hmm. And so I did it, and then it just didn't look. It looked sort of vacant, which seemed like part of the problem with what they were showing Spielberg, because it just didn't feel magical. Yep. So I just asked. My son came out to the studio. He was about 9 at the time, and I have this little fireproof trash can. I had him sit on it. I just took a Polaroid of him sitting on the trash can, and I just made a little silhouette of him, like sitting on the moon. And then I thought, well, he could be. Maybe he could be fishing. I don't even remember where the idea of having him fishing came from, to be honest. I don't think it was any of the guy in any of their pictures was fishing, although I wouldn't completely rule it out because I don't really remember. Mm-hmm. But I had William sit there and look like he was fishing. I photoshopped their typography onto it to show where this logo would go over it on a piece of tracing paper. And I drew one sheet that had the little crescent on it. They liked the clouds, and they could carry it. so then I gave them the drawing, and I said, I redesigned the logo too. And they said, well, we can't show this because that's already been completely rejected. But we'll take it just in case he hates the clouds. With the idea that if he hated the clouds, they would at least have one more thing for him to hate, I guess.
That's the complete opposite of what I was assuming. Like, we'll take it in case he likes the clouds.
I think that was it. But there seemed to be a kind of consensus that he wasn't really happy with anything. I don't think they expected these clouds to go over that well. I don't think it was clicking yet. But then I was, out for the day doing something. I think I was teaching, and I came home that afternoon, and I had just a ton of phone messages, and they were, from all kinds of people from ILM, people from DreamWorks. There might have been a message from Spielberg. There was definitely some stuff from Spielberg's office. Part of it was like they really wanted it, and they want to make sure they could use it because I had just sort of done this without even being asked, and it wasn't, in a contract or anything, I guess.
So it was on spec.
Well, it wasn't on spec. It wasn't on spec. It was just something I did. I worked a lot for ILM before, and it was always, I would just do stuff and and then I'd send them an invoice. So it wasn't a big deal. But now I was involved in this project, and one of the questions was, could I direct it? And I thought, gosh. I usually will say yes to things if people ask me if I could do something that I can't do, because I think that's a good creative opportunity.
Yep.
In this, I was a little nervous about that. So I said, well, I could probably be kind of the equivalent of I could work with a director, or, I don't even know what I would have to do, but I love the idea of doing this. And so I went down the next day and I met with Clint, and they, at this point, had brought in Dave Carson, who was the technical director, I guess, and he was, we just sat down and just kind of figured out how to do it. In the end, I wound up doing about 15 great big paintings. They're like 4 feet across.
Wow.
And then, so I did those paintings, and then I had them shot on large format transparencies, and then they had a giant film scanner at ILM, so they could make super high res scans of these paintings, and then they composited it together into the animated thing that you see.
Does it still, are you kind of desensitized to it when you see it on the screen, or are you still kind of still pretty proud of it?
I just saw it on something a couple of days ago, a new film. And especially in a theater, I just think, oh my gosh, it's just so great.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that there's people that thing means a lot to. I don't even know why. Can I tell you a story?
Sure.
With Marc Burckhardt.
Oh,
so
sure.
I was in New York.
Podcast guest. What's up, Marc?
Yeah, hey Marc. So Marc and I and Brian Stauffer went to New York to be there for Tim O'Brien's Hall of Fame induction, which was just a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
So we decided we would meet up for dinner, but we met up late, and we went over to Donahue's, which is a restaurant across from the Society. Yeah. We went in there, and it was kind of late, and they were just kind of closing down. But Marc is very convincing, so he talked them into making some food for us. So we were eating at this bar.
He's got that Texas charm,
He does. He's very charming, and
maybe he spoke to them in German too. I don't know what he did.
Well, this bartender was Irish, a nice man. But he was talking to us, and then a regular was in there. This lady who is kind of a regular in the bar. She was sitting there, and somehow, the subject of what we did came up, and Marc was saying, that we're illustrators, and he said, oh, Robert's a really good painter. And I said, no, Marc's a good painter. I'm just, and he goes, Robert did the DreamWorks logo. And he goes, what do you mean the DreamWorks logo? I said, well, the thing you see in the movie theater when the boy on the moon, and I sort of explained that to him. This guy was completely starstruck. It was I don't know what, it was I was Taylor Swift or something suddenly in this bar. And
close, very close.
So he goes, oh, could you sign a napkin? So I'm like, what?
I get it.
Of course, yeah, of course I will. He gave me this little piece of paper, so I drew the whole logo out for him. I just drew the whole thing with the clouds and the boy and I gave that to him, and he was he's like, oh man, I'm never going to sell this. I promise I'll never sell it. I said, go ahead. Nobody's going to,
yeah.
Nobody would want it, but if they did, you're welcome. Do whatever you want. It's kind of embarrassing. But anyway, so this went on. This isn't the whole story. Then the next day, which was the night of this event. I walked over to the Society from my hotel, which was on the west side, so I had to schlep across the park. And I got over there, and I was standing at a stoplight, and there's a guy in a suit, and he's talking about something to do with an animatic. So my ears kind of pricked up because he was talking about animation and working on an animatic and how he had to tell the director that something. Anyway, some sort of shop talk. About an hour later, we're actually at this reception. I see this guy. I said, "Oh, hey, I just want to say I hear you talking about animatic back there, so I thought I'd just say hi." Or I don't even remember how it is that I talked to him, but I did. Right. He said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Oh, Robert Hunt." Robert Hunt, the illustrator, right? And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I was just over at Donahue's." And this guy wouldn't shut up about you. This was like a day later. He's still, carrying on about this thing to random strangers. I never met this guy in my life, and
oh my God,
that's about as good as it gets. In
sure.
the 21st century illustration in terms of, name recognition.
I get it. I get why people would find that, because the logo is behind so many movies that people grew up watching and falling in love with and having it be like part of their childhood. I mean, I still refer to cartoons I saw in the 1980s as being these like important moments in my life. I said it to you an hour ago, talking about Return of the Jedi and how important that illustration was for me. And I was
Gladiator. Was not Gladiator was one of the first movies I saw that had the DreamWorks logo in it.
Yeah, yeah. So I get it. Speaking of Brian Stauffer and Tim O'Brien and Marc and everybody else, in separate speeches about you, Brian Stauffer called you the illustrator's illustrator. Tim O'Brien called you a genius. These speeches were in sort of collaboration or in response to or because of you winning the Hamilton King Award in 2015 and then the Distinguished Educator in the Arts Award in 2017, which is one of the awards I aspire to one day receive, but I know I never will. It's nice when people say nice things about you. A bartender asks you for a signed napkin. I mean, these are things that I find when it comes to these kinds of compliments or reactions to things that you do, the four most common responses among illustrators that I have found are humility, embarrassment, validation, and pride. I would say are the four main reactions to anytime anyone calls an illustrator or something of this nature. I feel like that's, speaking of strings, I feel like that's from one side to the other of a spectrum, from like being humble / embarrassed all the way to the other side, being proud of yourself.
Well,
where are you there?
It would be an act of inhumility to say that I was humble. That would be not a very humble thing to say. But I remember that when I was called by the Society about the Hamilton King Award, I thought they were kidding. I thought it was a joke. I thought some friends. I thought they were playing a trick on me. Right. I couldn't believe it both times. Those two things that you're asking me about. One thing that I will say is that I feel that we're talking about Kazu. I'd like to go on the record as saying that I think these are all things that Kazu deserved. The kind of recognition that Kazu just was not able to have because he died. He passed away.
Is there such a thing as a posthumous Hamilton King?
Well, there is I do feel that I'd like to see the Society of Illustrators recognize him as in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, he's not a Hall of Famer yet.
No, I think he should be, to be honest.
Oh yeah, that's next year. That has to happen.
I think it should happen. I hope it does. When Kazu passed away, one of the ways that I sort of coped with that is I became more social with other illustrators. So I know more illustrators, and I make an effort to stay in touch with them.
Yeah.
Than I used to do because I think it's important to have a friend. So I have friends that are illustrators. Because they're going through the same kind of stuff.
Right.
I have a long list. I wrote a list of illustrators that I wanted to mention. I wrote this out in case it came up. But I mean, there's so many great.
Fuchs, Bob Peak, Marc English. Are they on your list?
Well, those are definitely influences, but I'm talking about people that are just like alive now that are people that I think are great illustrators.
But you didn't answer the question, though.
The
Unless you did.
Humility
like the
question?
Humility part of it, yeah. So is it more humility, like, are you humble as in, thank you, and let us never talk about this again? Or are you humble as in, I appreciate and respect the honor,
Well, I
don't deserve it?
I'd be lying to say that I'm not grateful for recognition, career recognition, or recognition of a kind. I'm also aware that there's anytime somebody is chosen for something, somebody wasn't.
Yeah.
My wife has a better perspective on this than I do.
Same.
She said a long time ago to me that, or I think she read this somewhere, but that there's, in Congress, for example, there's sort of two kinds of people in Congress. There's show ponies and workhorses. I'm not sure there's any workhorses at the moment, but in life in general, right? There's always kind of going to be show ponies and workhorses. And I always wanted to be, I want to work. I want to do good work, and I want to achieve the level of being an artist. And to the extent that if somebody says you've done well, it makes you feel full of yourself, that can get in the way of progress. So I don't want to, I feel like it's important to not take these things, too literally, because there's all kinds of process. But on the other hand, I think what it really means is that there's a lot of people that see things the way I do, that understand, and if people appreciate me as a teacher or something, I think it's mainly because I share their values that, like I said, it's not supposed to be easy, and it's hard work, and you do the best you can, and so forth and so on, but I think that's I don't think you can really survive an illustration as a show pony. You have to, every illustrator I know, I think, kind of feels the way I do about, getting these things, which is kind of shock and then honored. Yeah. I started crying. If you want to know what I actually did, I got a phone call and I started crying because I couldn't believe it. Actually, I didn't cry when they told me. I cried when I told my wife because I just couldn't believe it. To me, the best thing about it is you get to give a speech at the Society of Illustrators.
Yep.
And that means you can say thank you to the people that got you there.
Yeah. I've had that pleasure one time. I gave a speech on behalf of Beatrix Potter when I accepted her Hall of Fame award.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
I was the art director for Frederick Warren at the time in the U.S.
Okay.
I earned a master's degree in illustration, and my thesis was on Potter. Anyway, that was a great
Where did you get this master's degree? Was it
FIT?
Okay.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I dropped a joke that I'm still very proud of, and it definitely got the laughs I needed for my ego. I said, Beatrix Potter is in so many words, I don't have the speech in front of me, but I said something like, Beatrix Potter is my favorite illustrator, which is true. Numbers 2 through 7 are Marshall Arisman, Peter DeSev, Guy Biot, and then the rest of the people who were being honored that night, and I got a big laugh. And I'm pretty proud of that.
That's great. It
was funnier in the moment.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Anyways.
Painful silence. No.
Yeah.
Get out the silence.
No, I have a laugh track. I'll throw in a laugh track. I'll put that in there. It doesn't sound like anything like you, but it's okay.
But you know who Bruce Wolfe was, right?
Sure.
So Bruce passed away a couple of years ago. It was very sad. Bruce is pretty much my father figure, in the art world. But Bruce, one of the first things Bruce ever said to me, he got a copy of CA magazine. He came in he went to get the mail and got CA magazine. It had an article about, I think, Thomas Blackshear.
Oh, God, his art is amazing.
Yeah, and Thomas actually lived here around this area for several years, so I got to know him pretty well when he was here. But there's this article about him, and he was like, "Look at this guy. He's like, he's out in Kansas City in the middle of nowhere doing this stuff." And I said, "Yeah, gosh, this is amazing stuff." And Bruce said, you could fly in a plane, fly over, across the United States, and you look down, anywhere you look out of the window, you see like a little town or a city, and there's maybe one person down there in the whole like 50,000 people. There's like one person down there, and they're like a great artist, and you're never going to know about them. He would always say things like that, but he said, and the thing is, it doesn't matter that you don't know about him. It doesn't make him any less of an artist.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of great things being done all over the world every minute that we don't know about. The fact that somebody got an article about them, is great, but that shouldn't be the goal, because that's just superfluous. And so that's why being humble, I suppose, is good, right? Because
sure, of course,
you don't want to accidentally turn yourself into a show pony.
No. Yeah, I don't know how I would react. I think I'd this is something for me and my therapist, my would-be therapist, to discuss, but I'd get very I'd feel like I don't deserve it, and I would that's where I would stay. And I talked about this with oh gosh, who was I talking to?
It's like imposter syndrome.
Brian Selznick. I think I was talking to Brian Selznick about this, and he had I'm pretty sure it was Brian. Sorry if it wasn't the person who's listening who it was. No, I'm pretty sure it was Brian. He was like, take the damn compliment, dude. It's you're showing them a great deal of disrespect if you don't. Yeah. And I thought that was a really good perspective. By saying, oh, no, I don't deserve it, don't be silly. You're just you're disrespecting the person who's saying something kind about you or offering you an award or, honoring you in any way, which I thought which is healthy and mature, and I'm not entirely healthy or mature. So
well, we all have our little problems.
Yes, we do. That's the title of this episode. We all have our little problems.
That's it.
We could definitely keep talking more and more for sure. I can tell, but we do have a lot of folks listening who
falling asleep.
Well, I hope not.
Hopefully not.
What would be one piece of insight or word of wisdom from you as an educator, a distinguished educator and illustrator, from you to them? And I wonder if you might want to add to that what you think Kazu would answer. If I were interviewing him, how would he answer this? So first you, then Kazu.
If I'm talking to students or people who are in the business and are insecure, kind of fearfulness, one thing that we always have to keep in mind is that the real enemy we're having to fight is fear. It's fear. Like art directors are fearful of losing their jobs. If there's financial security in their job, they're going to let you do a lot more creative work. As you know, if you're afraid of not getting work because you're charging too much for it, then you're going to not charge enough to survive. If you're afraid of what people might think of you, you're not going to take risks. I think you have to try not to be afraid and just realize that things are going to be okay. If you keep working and keep your eye on the ball, things will be okay. They're going to work out. One way or the other, life is going to work out for you. If you kind of honor whatever talent you were given and try to nurture it and try to be a good person and try and work hard, I think everything's going to work out. Yeah. But of course, life has ways of making other plans for you. But as far as the plans that you can make for yourself, I think you should just try to do the best you can. Whatever you do. If you're washing your car, try and do a good job of it. If you're making a cup of coffee, make a good, just do everything as well as you can. And if you can't or don't want to do a good job of it, don't do it. Do something else that you want to do well. That's, I think, what we're on the earth to do. So I think that some version of that is also what Kazu would say. Kazu was one of the reasons why I think Kazu should be in the Hall of Fame is because he was a very brave person. And I'll just tell you something that he said to my students that same time that he came to talk to my class. When he was introducing himself, he said, my great-great-grandfather was a samurai. And he was, in all seriousness, this is a person talking straight from the heart, I want to tell you. Mm-hmm. A person on their deathbed, I might add. He said, my great-grandfather was a samurai. My grandfather was a samurai. My father is a samurai. I came to America because I wanted to be an illustrator.
Amazing.
He left that hanging because his family never understood. He didn't have to say anything. because what that meant was that he gave up everything for this. And what happened was, as he told me, about a week later in the hospital, he said, I've done everything I had wanted to do. And he was happy. He felt at peace that he had done the best he could, and he had brought some joy to people and brought good things to the world, and what more could you ask for?
To learn more about Robert, visit roberthuntstudio.com. If you find value in this podcast, you can support it by subscribing to my best-selling Substack. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you will access hundreds of articles on the art, practice, and history of illustration, unlock bonus podcast episodes called Extra Credit, and connect with other members of the ID community. Join me on Substack by visiting illustrationdept.substack.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.